Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about something really interesting and important, which is the human energy body. So in our last video, we talked about the importance of the inner child symbolically, and even the importance of symbolism for our consciousness. So we talked about how the inner child is really significant for us as a force within our being, but also in the world, that we have a collective inner child that we have to be mindful of. And it is the inner child individually, but also collectively, that is the barometer for how advanced a person is or a society is, how balanced it is. And we also explored the crisis in consciousness that we're facing, the literalizing of our mind, the materialist scientism that is gripping our society and gripping our consciousness, that's not really allowing us the freedom or the flexibility to understand symbolism, to understand the symbol of our inner child, to understand ourself. And in the case of this series, it's not allowing us to understand anything to do with the occult. Because as we discussed in last episode, the occult is based in archetypes and symbols. If we cannot understand those, and I don't mean intellectually, I mean archetypes and symbols actually work as a technology in our mind intuitively, as I explained in regards to dreams. They have a function all on their own that is beyond the intellect. If we can't use that and engage with that, then we lose ourselves and we lose our ability to recognize dark occult practice. And we sort of abandon ourselves. And in that abandonment, things become darker and darker and darker and darker, right? It's like when we refuse to acknowledge that spirit exists, that we have a higher self, that we have an energy body, as we're going to be discussing today. What it's basically like is getting up out of a chair and walking away in a crowded room, or having a house and just deciding that you're going to abandon it. You're just going to walk away from your home. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is that someone's going to sit down in that chair. Someone's going to move on in. So just because you ignore your spirit and the spiritual world doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. Just because you don't occupy your higher dimensional selves consciously doesn't mean that they don't exist. And I don't recommend leaving them unoccupied. So in this video, we're going to talk about the energy body and why it's important and why it's significant. And it's one of those things where as soon as you start to tune into the energy body, as soon as you start to have a strong meditation practice and you begin contemplating spirituality, one of the first things you realize is that we may all look the same on a physical level. We all have 2 arms, we all have 2 legs, we may be different colors, we may have different cultures, but we're all human. So there's that kind of comfort in 3D thought, and in this materialist way of life, we find comfort in that. But as soon as you begin to open your senses back up, I would say reclaim your senses, you start to realize, whoa, we may all look the same in our 3D form, but when you start tuning into people's energy bodies, the energy that is around them, we are very different creatures. We're like different species. There's a spectrum of consciousness that humans can have, from being very, very inverted and dark and evil. And then there is a holy spectrum that is light, that is love, that is power. That is basically the exact rhythm of the cosmos itself, right? And human beings can resonate anywhere on this scale that they choose. And they usually create that resonance on a larger scale, life after life. But when you're here, it's your energy body that reveals where you are on that scale. So you can't necessarily look at somebody, especially if they're young. As soon as you start getting older, it's harder and harder and harder to hide, unless you have lots of money and you can get like blood transfusions and tons of weird procedures. But for the most part, like, you really can't tell physically by looking at someone. You really have to be able to get a look at, sense, feel, or know, intuit that person's energy as a whole. And one of the problems that we have in society is massive corruptions. Massive, massive levels of corruption, to the point that elections are like moving a centimeter when we need to move a mile. So we have immense corruption that is coming right along with intense materialism, intense scientism. Why? Because we can't see each other. You can't see that this person's a creep just by looking at them. But if you developed your intuition, you would know that. You would say, there's something not right with this. I'm going to back off. I'm going to ask these questions. I don't feel right about this. We are being conditioned to divorce ourselves from the very force that saves us. And we need to look at it that way, because psychic ability is not woo-woo. Intuition's not woo-woo. That's a garbage phrase. Some people certainly are, but we need this more than we need to make fun of it. And the reality is that our intuition is our survival mechanism. Our intuition exists fundamentally as a way to get more energy, more information, higher spectrums of energy than the basic 3D garden variety we have here. Our intuition is so that we can survive better. It's not so you can do weird channelings and walk around with a bejeweled headband and start cults. That's not what psychic ability and intuition is about. That is a weird offshoot that ironically happens when we divorce ourselves from spirit and do not know discernment. Everything negative about the spiritual scene, about the spiritual movement, is not a product of spirituality itself, but is a product of suppressing spirituality to the point that people can get away with anything because we have no discernment. And discernment is based in intuition, not only logical reason. So we have to bring this back. And part of coming back to this is understanding that we are energetic beings. We are more than our bodies. In fact, our physical bodies are just the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of our physical form is like those pictures of those motivational pictures of like icebergs. We're the little iceberg on the top of the surface, and the vast majority of us actually exists in higher dimensions at different frequencies of energy. That's the truth. This realm, this 3D realm, just has the ability to have us forget that. Just because we forget that, we forget a lot. So there's a couple things that we can start out with to understand the emotional, the energy body. So the energy body goes by lots of different names. It goes by the aura. It can be called the bioenergetic field. It can be called soul emanations. If you want to get really specific about it, it can be called the subtle bodies, because of course the bioenergetic field is a study within itself, where it has different layers that can be read, like books. And the bioenergetic field appears like an egg, right? And this is getting into a lot of mystery traditions with the cosmic egg, right? But it has all these layers that actually resonate with different energies, different dimensions, different times, different places. And so we're so spiritually rich, and it all emanates around us. It's all part of us, and it's all kind of tuned in and tapped into our different energy centers. And beyond our energy centers, our energy body is connected into a type of psychic circuitry that the Eastern traditions have called nadis. But it's like a type of psychic, it's kind of like a vascular system that exists, but instead of pushing blood through, it pushes spiritual energy through. It pushes your chi, your ki, your barak, your prana through, right? The only thing is that these pathways are not physical, and they're full of information, and the structures of these pathways are determined by the emotions that you think, and the emotions that you feel, and the thoughts that you think. That's what determines the quality of your energetic pathways. Now, the aim of the game with having an energy body is you want to get as much of that energy body functioning and fast moving as you possibly can. And this actually raises the human intelligence. Intuition is a higher form of intelligence. So you want to get that top of the iceberg completely connected with the bottom of the iceberg. And that's where you get these things called cities or superpowers, and you get incredible psychic abilities, incredible physical abilities, the Tibetan rainbow body. You start hearing these myths and these stories of people who can do incredible things. Yeah, because they took their psychic circuitry that makes up their bioenergetic field, and they nourished it. They did practices, and they reconnected themselves to their higher etheric bodies. They integrated themselves. So that's the name of the game. The name of the game with us here on Earth as physical beings is to integrate ourselves with our higher forms, with our soul, okay? And that is also called ascension. Ascension is often, portrayed as the soul leaving the body, or the body kind of moving up into heaven. But the reality is it's more about bringing heaven down into us. And it's that integration that allows us to experience the ascension in the sense that we can traverse anywhere. We can traverse the higher worlds, right, from within. So the energy body is really, really, really important, because at the end of the day, if you can see someone's energy body, you can see where they are in this process. You can see where they are with this level of integration, right? If you don't acknowledge the energy body, you're cutting yourself off from 99.9% of the information available about a person. You're not even seeing the person or sensing the person for who they are. Okay, so when we have our energy body, everyone's energy body is absolutely unique. Your energy body is going to be unique to you, and someone else's energy body is going to be unique to them. And to put it very simply, the energy body is determined by the thoughts that we think and the emotions that we feel. So if you're thinking thoughts that are mature or like loving, taking responsibility for your life, things like this allows more higher energy to come in. It allows you to progress. And if you have a lot of fearful thoughts that you sit in all the time and you don't come in and mitigate those, you don't come in and take responsibility for those, you deteriorate. Because you're just allowing fear, which is the destructive force in the universe, to shape you. And so you begin to become destructive. And this is going to become very, very important in the next few videos. Attuning your energy body to either this destructive, degenerate, regressive force, and what happens to the energy body when that happens. Because that completely changes your consciousness in every way. In every way. You go to that evil spectrum, you know? And then if you're tuning into it in a more loving sense, that changes your consciousness in every way. So it's really important to really sense that and to understand that. But that's basically, from our human perspective, our thoughts and our emotions really do determine the levels of our spirit that we can hold within us. Okay, so that's kind of the basic thing to understand. Because this season is all about the child and the inner child, I want to discuss the energy body with the inner child in mind and with the child in mind. Because the archetype of the child is actually a really good way to understand ourselves and to understand our energy body. Obviously, therapists and psychologists know this and they figured it out. But we have to remember that every psychological component that is important has an esoteric component or an esoteric form. Whatever happens in the material world also happens in the esoteric world. And so the inner child, the reason why it's so important in psychology is because it actually has a overlapping with our esoteric self, and for our purposes today, our bioenergetic field. So what is the purpose of the inner child in the bioenergetic field? Well, I'll tell you. We just talked about how when you go into really deep senses of fear and you really just become helpless and you allow the destructive energy of fear to live inside of you, that corresponds directly with where your inner child is damaged. So your bioenergetic field will actually form esoteric pathways that are the exact pattern of trauma that you experienced. So your exact loss of innocence, your inner child's exact damage will form that pathway of fear. Now, your soul, because most of you is light, is going to push you to reconcile that. It's going to push you to return to your innocence. It's going to push you to return to your light, to your sense of wonder, and every positive aspect of the inner child we discussed in the last video. Your higher self is naturally going to push you to the return to innocence. But as you return to innocence, you will have gone through this struggle, so now you're wise. Now you're the wise child. So we never, ever lose the child. Even though we grow up and we mature, We never lose the child. The child always sits inside of us, especially in the energy body, as a driving force that is both the pattern of abuse that we've experienced, but also the exact pattern of healing. And so the inner child is a huge force in the occult, in psychic work, in psychology, and in the human being, because it represents our loss of purity and then our return to it. Because everything is about coming full circle. And so out of the damaged child must emerge a mature consciousness, a steady level consciousness that begins to rise and nourish the inner child and become that parent that they never had. And even to love and forgive whatever happened to them. And this releases them from those pathways. And this is what all the religions talk about. They talk about how basically to move through the corruption of the inner child. And on this path, we're confronted with two choices. We can either rise above the damage that we have and become what we never had, which is actually the purpose of experiencing the damage to begin with. Or we can stay deep in duality and deep in that fractured nature of fear, and we can become the exact monster that hurt us, that we feel hurt us. And that is an attempt to dominate rather than be dominated. The only thing that can happen when we stay in fear is that we get a sense of control through domination. And we have to become the victimizer because we can't be the victim. That crushed us. That got us to where we are. That got us pessimistic and cynical and depressed and losing hope for the world and dark. Can't be victim anymore. You have two choices. You can either rise and become more than that and connect with your higher self and move more into those divine qualities, or you can become the victimizer. Those are the two choices, but it's all centered around the inner child, and it's all centered around that loss of innocence. And this is also why in occult rituals, there's so much use of children, as it's actually connected right back to this. It's connected right back into this. Of course, if you go on to restore your template of your inner child template through spiritual work, and it's hard. It's hard to do. That's one of the reasons why people don't really come to spirituality, is because it's like looking in a mirror. It's difficult. But if you can do that work, you get immense spiritual power. And I'm talking, you get a lot of magnetism that could manifest as charisma. You can have the power to hands-on heal people. You have a huge amount of life force energy that you can channel. You have influence, you have power, you have real spiritual power, right? And that's really what makes a difference in occult ritual, is how much life force can be generated in a room. So I'm gonna leave that there. We're gonna move on to next week in our video, in this series. I am going to talk about what happens when the bioenergetic field gets entrenched in this fear for a long period of time. Because something very interesting happens to our bioenergetic field and our consciousness when we stay in fear for too long. I just mentioned that we fall into this kind of darker spectrum of consciousness that can be seen and sensed. There's an odor, if you will. But next video, I'm going to talk exactly about what happens to the bioenergetic field when we're entrenched in fear, when we give over to that energy, because something very specific happens. So I'm gonna get into that. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you like this work, please, please, please support me. Consider becoming a premium member. There's going to be extra videos in this series that will appear on my website and nowhere else. On the forums, we're gonna go deeper into each video, and there's even gonna be reading lists with some videos that allow you to go deeper into each topic and engage in discussions with people who are interested as well, and as with myself. So beyond that, sign up for my newsletter, like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, all my love your way.